Brief introduction to the panel. Hi, I'm Lance Bultena from Hogan Lovells, which is a global law firm. We got about pushing 3,000 lawyers, around 40 offices. And we're organized by sectors so that we can better connect with our clients. So why don't I just ask everyone to introduce yourselves for a few minutes and then we'll get started. So.
Hello everyone, Antoine Lafay. I'm R&D Director at Valeo, leading Tier 1, specialized in electrification and automated driving. And I'm leading the driving software for ADAS and automated vehicles.
Hi everyone, my name is Christelle Coslin and I'm a partner at Hogan Lovells in Paris. I focus on product liability, product safety issues, both from a risk assessment and litigation perspective, and in B2C or B2B context. And most of my days are filled up with helping clients putting and keeping products on the market. And so you don't hesitate if you have any questions on those terms.
Yeah, and I'm Patrick Ayat, also from Hogan Lovells in Munich. I'm running our global sector program in the firm, and I'm focusing with my work on automotive and mobility companies, manufacturers, suppliers, but also new entrants, and specifically also in the AV space.
All right. So the title of this panel is The Rise of AVs. A few years ago, people were assuming that by this time we'd have robo-taxis taking us to this event in Paris. And note that the conference title is Autonomy. I think there was a sense of optimism. But AVs have had a little bit of a challenge. So I think it's time for us to just remind ourselves of the promise. So I'm going to ask everyone, what kind of excites you about the prospect of AVs? And so for me, it's mobility for the aged and disadvantaged. So several years ago, I had to take the car keys from my parents in rural America, and that left them isolated. There were no taxi cabs. And so I'm hoping that AVs will help solve that problem.
Yeah. So now we see that the AVs are coming. It's becoming a reality, and we see two different markets. The first one is the passenger vehicle market, and we have now the first autonomous vehicle for passenger cars, like Mercedes EQS or E-Class, Honda Legend in Japan. And that's the first level of autonomy with level 3, where the driver is not responsible anymore, and the system is taking the responsibility. So it's becoming a reality for passenger vehicles on very specific domain of operation, like highway, high speed, without pedestrians around, things like that. That's the first market that is now existing. The second one is the mobility as a service. And we see that, especially in the US and in China, we see more and more robotaxi players putting their taxi in service, driverless, 24/7, with an expanding area in the different countries. I will come back to it later on.
Okay. Is there anything that you personally think would be kind of cool about AVs? I mean, are you looking forward to commuting to work and getting to watch a movie or anything like that?
I think if I can spare the 30 minutes every morning in the traffic jam and taking the benefit of this time to work, to spend the time with relatives on the video conference, that would be very, very cool.
All right. And the reason I'm asking is because at the end of this, I want to come back to what are the challenges that it'll take to get us to that spot. Christelle, what are you looking forward to with AVs?
Well, maybe expanding on your dream, Lance, I would say my dream is to make it a lot easier access to mobility for everyone. And I'm thinking more, taking a step back, if you look at history over the recent centuries, the more people have been able to move around, the more humanity as a whole has progressed. And that would really be my wish with AVs rising.
Oh, you made me so happy with that. You know, my background in economics, if the transportation and energy are right, the economy grows and everybody's better off. Patrick, how about you?
Well, I think to drive a car is a bit outdated now. You take a train, you take a plane, and normally you don't drive it yourself. So why would you do that with a car? Whereas if it comes to like short-term distance, like in the city or so, then you take a bike, a scooter, so that I understand, and it's fun. But the car, I think, should also become more and more autonomous going forward.
Yeah, so Antoine, let's talk a touch more about Valeo's business model. right? So you're a well-known global tier one. Are you trying to enter the market as the OEM, the provider, or are you working with many other companies? And where do you see the promise most? Is it Europe? Is it Asia? Is it a global scale? How are you looking at it?
So as a global tier one, we are delivering all the OEMs, traditional OEMs, as well new players. And as an example today in the ADAS world, so the driving assistance system, one car out of 3 is fitted with Valeo equipment in ADAS, like front camera, like radars, like parking systems to deliver like functions like ACC, AB, lane keeping systems that are the foundation for automated driving. That's really the core of the components, hardware, software that is capable to bring the first level of autonomy to the passenger vehicles.
Very cool. So, Patrick, what's happening with the regulatory construct in Europe? I know there's been some diligent work on that in Europe for some time.
Yeah, so many years ago, I remember, I think it was 2017 or something, I was at a conference in Sweden and there was a poll asking about what is the biggest obstacle for autonomous vehicles, and the top answer was the legal framework. And I was like, nah, I don't think so. Although it is true that we were not that far as we are now, we have changed the type approval system in Europe to allow at least a small series of autonomous vehicles, so companies can make use of it. I think the legal framework is there. It's just that it also needs a local implementation. So there is a law in Germany. So you have to go through the type approval level for Europe, and then you also have to go through the national level to get it approved, even to the municipal level. And that makes it a bit complex. We can now see in the UK, for example, as they are not part of the EU, they have more flexibility. They don't have to adhere to the European type approval system, so they are preparing a bill specifically on autonomous vehicles. And when this comes, I've heard from some companies that they are looking, when they look at Europe, they probably look first at UK because they think it's easier to implement without the European legal system around it and the national one. So it's only one step in the UK, whereas in Europe you still have to go basically 2 steps, maybe even 3 steps if you look at the municipal level.
I recently held a widely attended event in DC, and the person who was the EU ambassador to the US said, well, since I'm from the EU, I have to talk about regulations, which got a laugh. So, Christelle, now I have to go to you. Artificial intelligence, it's a machine learning, it's a big part of autonomous vehicles. Is there any impact there for where Europe is going on the regulation of AVs?
Well, sure. But I think the issue doesn't come from any single regulation, but probably more from the combination, because you have the AI Act that was almost passed and is now we almost have the final version. But you also have the AI Liability Directive. Probably most people haven't heard of that, but it's almost finalized, and it's going to impact the questions around civil liability associated with AI. You also have, for any type of products, a revision of product liability rules. Product safety rules have also been reformed very recently at EU level. So I think the challenge there, I would say, is not coming only from the AI bit of that, but more into how we are going to combine all these techs. And I think this is still quite a mystery to me. Will probably take years to uncover it.
If it's a mystery to you, that's a real challenge. So let's just stay there with the liability framework before we come back to other markets. So what are the main issues in the liability system that have to be worked out as AVs progress towards wider market adaptation?
Well, I guess the main point we all have in mind is when there is an accident, who's going to be liable for it from a legal standpoint? And I think from experience, we can say that the more complex products become in terms of tech development, the more difficult it is to identify the root causes of any issue. That's not specific to AV, but of course, AV is going to be a new field of implementation of that challenge. I guess where to start is the evidence. does the tech systems allow to have data records allowing to identify the circumstances surrounding the accident? And that's not for sure in all cases. So the way the legal framework I sort of try to address that is by creating what we call presumptions. So saying that because you're the manufacturer, you're going to bear responsibility until you prove you're not responsible. And the purpose of that sort of framework is consumer protection. We've seen that previously with classic cars as well in some context, but the idea is really to make sure that if people are injured, well, they have access to remedy for that injury. But then, of course, there will be multiple questions and debates among all the stakeholders of the AV ecosystem in terms of who should bear liability. And that's going to lead to quite tough disputes in some cases.
All right. So we're here in one of the world's great cities in Paris, and we've talked a bit about Europe. But Antoine, let's talk a second about China. It's the world's largest automobile market. It's not the world's most profitable. That's the US. But what's it look like as an entity that's testing vehicles all over the world? How does China feel relative to Europe on the testing front?
Yeah, I've been in China a few months ago, and I've been impressed by the progress in the last years. And now, as an example, there are like 15 tier 1 cities where the autonomous vehicles are driving 24/7 in some areas, and it's very impressive. And the forecast is the doubling every year the number of cities, going from tier 1 cities to new tier 1 cities, and then tier 2 and other cities. That's really how we see the market progressing in this area, and we see many firms like WeRide, Baidu, Pony AI expanding their operations, backed with the local ecosystem of Chinese OEMs and EV players. That's really impressive, and the pace is so impressive that the competition with the US in this field is tough.
It reminds me of. You were there also when we did the Financial Times Reuters in Detroit, and there was Chris Urmson, who used to run Google Automotive and now has Aurora is his company. And he said 5 or 6 years ago, and there were a lot of autonomous driving companies out there, including Argo AI, for example. And he said, actually, he doesn't think that there will be many players left after 5 to 10 years. He said there would be 2 in the US, Waymo, and he hoped that he would be the other one with Aurora. So he was no more mentioning of Argo AI, and he was right. He said there might be 1 or 2 in China, and he said there would be none in Europe. And just think about that. I mean, look at the aircraft industry, where you have basically like 2 global players, but these are the only ones. And he kind of predicted the same for autonomous vehicles. At the moment, it looks like we are heading into this direction, but of course, no one knows how it develops further. But it's just interesting to see how it developed.
Well, that's kind of the way software goes, because the marginal cost is very low. And I see Ross in the back seat. A few years ago, he mentioned that, there was the bubble of investments, and the US was massive, and then it was China, and the Israeli investment in this area was greater than all of European investment. But let's talk a bit about the US. I mean, how are you seeing it? What I see is in San Francisco and Austin and a few other places, there's full testing of AVs. There have been some accidents. Because we're Americans, we sometimes do curious things. We have people that jump on top of AVs, throw things at them. One of my colleagues might have played that stunt, but we won't talk about that.
No, it's not that bad.
No, he just stepped out and the car stopped immediately.
It will not happen in China.
That will not. Tell us about that. Yeah.
No, I think in the US for sure, like the cruise accident has put a slowdown on this specific case, but overall the trend is very positive. We see Waymo expanding. Even recently, 1st of March, they announced the expansion of their operating services. So the trend is there. We see Motional now as quite strong in the US. The expansion in the US is different from China. It's we see as well the doubling every year. today we estimated that by end of 2024, the services will be in 7 cities. It's mainly on the sunny side of the US, and the challenge for the US players is to expand towards bad weather conditions. So they will extend first toward operations with rain and a bit of fog, and ultimately to go to the North Belt with. So that's the challenge in the US, to expand from the operation with nice conditions to worse conditions.
Yeah. So let's go from just that kind of model of a robo-taxi or personal vehicles to where else AV technology might go and what that means. So Patrick, at this conference a few years ago, you said the question about AVs was not when, but where. What's your current thinking on that? Where do you see AVs going now?
It's the same thinking I had many years ago. I don't quite believe in the interaction between humans and machines. I think it's too complex, it's too dangerous, they don't understand each other. And that's why I said, to me, it's the confined areas. So it could be a dedicated lane on the highway, in the commercial vehicle area. That would very much make sense. It could be a parking lot. It could be a certain village where you only have autonomous vehicles. But the interaction is really difficult. So last week I was in London at a conference called Connected Autonomous Mobility, very specific about autonomous vehicles. And there was one lecturer from the UK, and she was, I think they call it like systems thinking. So they do a lot of research more generally about autonomy. And so they are trying to improve this interaction between humans and machines. For example, if you go to a crossing as a pedestrian and an autonomous car comes, you are very skeptical because you don't have the eye contact. You don't really notice whether this driver now sees you and stops. So they came up with the idea that the vehicle at the very front would put a sign on, like a smiley. And whenever the smiley sign is on, the passenger would know, okay, the car recognized me, stopped, and now it's safe for me to go. And this kind of like human interaction is needed to make it smoother, this, the interaction between humans and machines. So that's why I say still, it's the confined areas, and if we want to bring it all together with like human drivers and pedestrians and whatever, it gets very complex. But I'd be very interested to hear your perspective on that.
So I fully agree on the aspect of human-machine interface. And so I see two challenges. The first one is for the ego vehicle to predict the behaviors of the other road users, especially the pedestrians. So that's a key brick, the prediction of the intention of the pedestrian. And the second one being the interaction. And we are working as Valeo, especially on this topic with our external lighting business unit, how to project things on the road, on the front fascia, things like that, in order to make the pedestrian understanding our willingness to do. On the confined area, I'm a bit more skeptical. I think if we want to scale up in terms of business, we would need to be able to drive everywhere, at least in a certain area. And I think that's a challenge for the time being to ride in the middle of other human road users.
So we were at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas earlier this year. And again, John Deere was showing its autonomous drive tractors with machine learning to apply pesticides and herbicides. We saw heavy machinery for mining equipment, remote mining, industrial applications for AVs. Are those things that Valeo is working on, or is that not your market?
We strongly believe that all the automotive technologies we are developing could be applied to this area. There are many synergies in terms of building blocks, research, development, and so on. And this is definitely all these industries we are lacking workforces, and this will help to overcome this challenge of lack of workforce and increasing the productivity.
And probably safety too, because if you can take those machines places where you wouldn't want to put a person.
And safety, you are fully right. And I think one primary goal of the automated driving is to increase the road safety. We forgot to mention it as a promise, but that's fully true. And the first return on expert from out of millions of kilometers driven in the US is showing a strong benefit compared to human driving.
We're going to come back to that in 1 second, but you want to say something?
Sorry, and then I'll stop. But just because you were mentioning CES, I think also autonomous vehicles, we need to see it more holistically and not just the vehicles, but moving around more holistically. Also, if you look at Asia, Japan, and also Korea now, a lot of investments by automotive companies in robotics. And robotics doesn't stop with like driving people around. It's also in the apartments and whatever. Toyota does that. Hyundai is going this direction. And then we saw at CES the DICE from Hyundai. I don't know if where you saw it, which is not a vehicle. It's a box, and you sit in this box, and it moves autonomously. So it doesn't have, well, it must have wheels or something, but it's like not a. We have to rethink also the vehicles, the modes of transports, and I think, of course, if you have this kind of investment to do that, that's where we need to go.
Yeah, we don't know what we don't know yet. So the design is changing. I want to go back to Christelle for one thing. As we see AVs in places that aren't just cars on the road, does that make the liability environment easier?
I'm not sure there's anything easy about that because
Oh, so you're not going to be out of a job?
No, I don't think so. But, that's probably why I'm here as well. But, I think the more regulated an environment is, it has its pros and cons. The pros of that is that at least you got some predictability of the rules that will apply. In less regulated environment, there will be rules, but the issue may be that you don't know them at the moment you put your product on the market. So that's the main difference I see. Then it's a question of risk appetite.
Okay, so let's go back to safety. I mean, a few years ago, if we were at a conference on autonomy, the data that people always quoted was that 94% of the accidents on the roads were caused by human error. AVs should be able to eliminate a very high percentage of that error, so fewer accidents, greater safety, hopefully a lower liability framework. You've been watching this in your job at Valeo. How's the technology coming along? Is that promise possible?
Yeah, even before autonomous vehicles, there is this ADAS, Advanced Driving Assistance Systems, and we see this deploying massively thanks to the General Safety Regulation version 2 that now enforces on each and every car, new car, systems like emergency braking, lane keeping, overspeed preventions. So that's key bricks that are deployed largely to everyone. That helps the safety for sure.
All right, one more question. Let's bring in geopolitical issues. There's a lot of competition between China and the global West. Obviously, the EU is a big part of the global West. There have been a lot of restrictions on technology coming into China. Well, coming in, but you can't take it back out. Data limits. Now we're seeing the US and EU kind of responding to that. How is Valeo dealing with that kind of complex challenge in its evaluation of developing software systems that might be otherwise global?
So being a global tier one, we are obliged to address the full market. So we are taking this threat really seriously, and we invested a lot in China in order to develop a local innovation in China for the Chinese market, and that's the way we are answering this with a strong presence in China for the Chinese OEMs.
It looks like we've got about 1 minute left in this panel. Patrick, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, just to add, geopolitical issues, yes, but I think autonomous vehicles is also very much connected with decarbonization of our world and particularly electrification. And that's the biggest problem at the moment. When we talk about autonomous vehicles, we have to talk about the automotive manufacturers and, of course, the suppliers. And all the investments currently have to go into EVs in the last few years. And they downsized the investments into autonomous vehicles, which is also why it seemed that it went down a little bit. But now we see a bit more activity again, but not from them. And that's the issue. So they can't do both at the same time. Now they are even struggling with EVs because of consumer acceptance and the like. And that, I think, makes it very complex also for autonomous vehicles. There is definitely a market. It will come. It's just so difficult in light also of the broader climate change issues that we have.
Yeah, let's take a very brief closing look at that mobility market. It's a world where technology is changing. EVs and AVs, the software-defined vehicle. And that challenge is always difficult, but it's also mediated by markets, not just markets, but governments. And so just one final word. Whenever one sees adaptation charts or growth charts, they're either exponential or they're linear, but in either case, they're smooth. It's just a perfect line on a graph. But that's not life. In real life, the curves kind of go like this. They have plateaus. We're seeing some of that with AVs and with EVs. But if you take a look at the trend, if you look back, that extrapolation will fit something that is a constant change. But it's not going to feel like that when we're in it. So I think the promise is great. The challenges are going to be there too, but we'll get it done. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you.